Chris, thank you so much for joining me for Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandhi.
Greg, thanks so much for having me.
It's a delight to have you here every time, Chris, whether you're chatting with me way back in the day for Duplicate Keys or Keith on that covers episode. We are continuously thrilled with the band's, support and, encouragement that we keep this crazy experiment going that we've got over here. So it just means a lot that you're willing to spend some time with me post tour to jump in here and chat with me about A Catastrophic Break with Consensus Reality. So welcome back from tour.
Well, thanks so much. And the feeling is very mutual between us and you guys.
It's fabulous. Well, Chris, we're going to jump right in here because we've got a lot of ground to cover for the record. And we're going to do a sort of song by song breakdown for the Catastrophic Break Patreon record, which was recently released worldwide to the public. So I'm wondering if you can just, in your recollection, tell me how you came to start thinking about doing music and committing to, the labor of making music for your Patreon. I'm curious about where this all started for you and how this project kind of came together in your mind.
Well, I mean, it just seemed like an interesting idea to me, hopefully for the listeners, but especially for me, because I've never really played music in any meaningful sense with anybody outside of Propagandhi. So that's like, that's pretty much 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me kind of curious whether or not, could I actually do something like this? And would it be successful? Would it be a failure? And I thought, well, whatever happens, I would probably learn a lot from the process of doing it with people from outside of Propagandhi. So I was intrigued by the possibility of it, and I think the possibility of failure on my own terms was really intriguing to me, because part of the motivation for the whole Patreon project in general, initially, well, still, was the desire to do something with complete autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
Where whether something I do succeeds or fails is just like it's in my hands. I haven't had that opportunity in my creative life pretty much ever, and I think I've realized that I think I need that kind of autonomy in, even if it's off in the wilderness. I just need something. Even if it turns out to be an embarrassing failure, which I don't think most of the Patreon stuff is, but I like I say, I was intrigued by the possibility of failing on my own terms. In Propagandhi, obviously, everybody chimes in on our. It's not like there's not autonomy in Propagandhi. I think, especially Todd and I, as the prime songwriters, we try to give each other the chance to, even when we doubt the other guy's ideas.
Right.
I think we both try to let it happen, but there is a limit to it, and I think we both feel those limits every so often, because people are chiming in on our ideas, and even if verbally we're like, oh yeah, go ahead, try that. There's body language, that it's telling you, okay, they're not loving this. And that is it's not an infringement on people's autonomy, but it's just it's not the autonomy I was looking for. I think I needed an outlet where I could be utterly autonomous with creative decisions, and I guess what it is everybody else in the band has their own private, personal, creative outlets that I don't get to weigh in on. Sulan has a bunch of various guitar-oriented projects. That Beav builds guitars. I don't get to weigh in on that.
Yeah.
Todd paints, all these things they do on their own that I don't weigh in on, and of course I wouldn't. And they get to succeed or fail with that kind of autonomy. And I think I've watched that longingly
Yeah.
over the years, and I guess I wanted a piece of it. And I think the Patreon thing and the music idea was the most casual way I could think of doing that without it becoming a distraction for Propagandhi, because that's not what I wanted. I didn't want it to seem like I didn't want it to be just a distraction, like that people are like, oh, he's doing this thing on his own. I just
Right.
wanted it to be a project sort of off in the weeds that people that are really into it would dig, but not that would become this thing that would take anything away from the band.
Wonderful. I did a lot of conversations with other people who played on the record, and a few times it came up to where there was a list that came out with some possible songs to consider. Do you remember if you had like an original list of Propagandhi songs that you were considering for the reimagined versions that eventually went on? Do you remember the full list that you made?
No.
Okay.
Like, I had some ideas. Obviously, I think Speculative Fiction and Coach's Corner were on that because we obviously did something with those.
Yeah.
My guess is that other songs on the list would have been Without Love, probably Potemkin City Limits. I'm pretty sure I had this idea with Murray Pulver to do a version of Victory Lap that was in a George Michael style.
Awesome.
But that never came to be. Probably Zoochosis, possibly Cop Just Out of Frame. I think America's Army. But
Nice.
Like, I don't actually have a list. I don't remember what I was bandying about with these guys.
Totally fine. Well, and I was thinking about what you were saying a minute ago about, your need for this other thing that doesn't distract from the band. And I see you've done several things over the years. You did, Escape Velocity with Derek for a long time, and the Propagandhi podcast, short-lived one. But then there's also G7 Radio. So there's a few things that you've done over the years that a lot of people have really appreciated that are just outside the band.
Right. Exactly. Outside the band, but still not autonomous.
Right. Yes. Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense now. Okay. Well, I want to start diving into these songs here. We've got, I kind of want to go through the record, track by track, and just hear your stories that spring to mind. There's no wrong answer, obviously. I'm just looking to hear your, Mars rover, on the ground sort of stories here. Yeah. So let's start with Speculative Fiction.
Drawn across the 49th parallel, cut out diplomatic ties as we expel all American dignitary.
What was special about the reimagined process for this tune for you? What makes this one kind of special to you, like looking back on it?
Well, I know I just got finished saying that this was all about complete autonomy,
right?
Having the ability to make completely autonomous creative decisions, but it was actually letting go is what stood out to me for this. And I know that seems to contradict this idea of autonomy, but it was actually extremely liberating and interesting and instructive for me to make the completely autonomous decision to get out of the way and not backseat drive the process of making the song with these guys, like these real world, highly accomplished and unbelievably talented studio musicians. Get out of the way as they interpret the song, I guess in their own musical dialect. It was fucking fascinating to watch and hear it unfold in real time. Like, half the time, my jaw was on the floor at how fast things were coming together with these guys. The ease with which each of these musicians would find their place so quickly in these recorded performances. That Murray had just, like, they didn't come in knowing the song. Murray was just scribbling down the structure on a piece of paper literally moments before the guy pressed record. So, you know, they weren't belaboring, they weren't worrying about, you know, they weren't worrying about that, and they weren't belaboring things that we tend to obsess about when we record Propagandhi. They weren't obsessing over, you know, every guitar part or bass fill or drum roll, and like they weren't even checking their tunings with a tuner between takes. It was like, to me, it was so different from how we roll in Propagandhi. And I guess just letting that unfold and trusting them was a unique experience for me. And I guess that's just what was special about it, was just letting go.
So I know that Murray was really instrumental in the arrangement process. Can you tell me about like working with Murray before the studio?
Yeah, on this song, I don't know that we really did a lot of work before the studio on this song. I remember getting together with him with the Coach's Corner tune.
Oh, okay.
And we got to the studio, and I was like, well, like, should I play these guys the song like from the record? And he's like, no, don't worry about it. You know, and he just was scribbling down the structure on paper for these guys and showing them the parts quickly. And I was feeling this anxiety about like, well, I think I should tell them here that this part should go like this. But I was resisting that impulse at the same time, because I just didn't want to backseat drive it. I wanted to see what these guys would do with this music, and then, you know, whether or not it succeeded or failed was not as important as me letting go and watching the process.
Yeah, like the memories that some of the interviews that we're about to hear share is that you were kind of like almost a super hands-off in the process, and that you seemed to be almost like surprised at how these studio session guys work in comparison to your own history in music. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was shocked. I was shocked and like kind of exhilarated. And probably to them, it was like they were probably bemused that every time Murray would show me an idea, I'd be like, "That's fucking awesome!" Like,
yeah,
literally every time. and he would just start laughing. Like I think he thought, "Are you serious? Like everything's a good idea?" You know, but it literally was everything these guys would play. I was like, "Fuck, that's amazing," and which helped me let go, because then I could just trust that they were going to take it in some really cool direction. So yeah, my appreciation for what they do was just like, it was enormous.
What was the vocal process like for you, like when you got home? Because I know that you did vocals at your house, right?
Yeah, I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it in front of those guys.
Yeah, tell me about this.
I just did my usual thing. Like in Propagandhi, I also tend to do this. Like I will, if I have to, or if I feel like I need direction, I'll do it. I'll do the vocals with everybody at the studio and get input. But if I know what I want, I'll go home and do those parts. You know, it saves the band some money, and it just gives me the kind of space I need to be feel a little more free and creative. And I think with this especially, because I felt like I was out of my depth with these guys, that I was just too sheepish to do it in front of them. So I went home and did them myself. And then I would send them to Murray and say, well, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? You know, are these vocal melodies good? Like, I wanted his input to see if he had anything different, and he would chime in, and it seemed to be coming together. Like I wasn't, you know, I was able to pull off. I felt like I was able to keep up by just doing it on my own, you know, not make it seem like it didn't seem as I didn't seem as glaringly amateur as I thought I would,
Mm-hmm.
doing it this way. So, because I remember there was one point in the studio where Murray was trying to get me to sing along while they were tracking. It was just like a nightmare to me. It was like
Oh,
one of the terrible dreams where, you're naked at school or something.
yeah.
So I was glad he was up for, letting me investigate that stuff at home.
Chris, let's move on to track 2 on the record. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, sweet. So we got Panorama.
Walking down an alley, deep through New York. I did it for today. On the skyways road, concrete from far below, rising up above, surrounded by shadows, done without gods, and all strangers alike. I'll ride in the blind, the purple of their eyes, in memory of
by Voivod. And I want to hear your take on this record. I've been listening to some Voivod recently, and Angel Rat is an really interesting release. And I'm wondering if you can just tell me your backstory with regards to this record, perhaps.
Yeah, Angel Rat. It's interesting because Angel Rat came out. I can't remember the year, but I remember it being a controversial release amongst my musical peer group at the time, and it kind of marked a point in my relationship with Voivod where, like, in retrospect, how I see it is that they moved ahead of where I was at for a few years musically. Like, I was still paying attention. I was still buying the records when they put them out throughout the 90s, but I was having a lot of trouble connecting to the records in the same way that I did in the 80s. And it wasn't really until probably I think in 2000 they put out the self-titled LP with Jason Newsted on bass. And I felt like, okay, well, I'm either catching up to them, or I don't know what it was. I guess I felt like I felt like I connected to that record more than what I had connected to for the previous 10 years. And it kind of made me look back on the 90s output, particularly Angel Rat and Outer Limits. And I think I finally caught up to where they were going at the time. And I now think Angel Rat and Outer Limits are almost their most interesting records. So that was, that's always a fun epiphany, not getting something for a long time and then finally getting it. So, and that's why, Panorama, I liked when it came out. I thought it was an amazing song then, but the rest of the record didn't connect with me. Now it does. And I just wanted to pay tribute to that fact by doing this song instead of some old 80s classic.
Right. Well, total side note, I remember when you sold a lot of your record collection, did you know that I personally bought your Dimension Hatros when you sold that?
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So I allowed myself one record from your record sale. And so I have your copy of Dimension Hatros, which I felt was an appropriate record to buy from your collection, because without, you mentioning Voivod so many times over the years, that's a band that I likely never would have found on my own in my entire life. So I was like, this is a one thing that I'm going to get. So I have your Dimension Hatros in my collection over here.
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah. So this is a special one for me because Panorama, you get to reunite with Beeve for a recording after his time in Propagandhi, along with the rest of Agassi, including, Derek Hogue that we mentioned earlier, and Ryan Nash. And Ryan's been on the podcast before, and I actually got to meet Ryan in Winnipeg last year at your trio of shows over the Canadian Thanksgiving weekend. But I'm curious about your time, about what did you enjoy most about this process of getting involved with Agassi, but also Beeve again?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It was just the most fun part about it was playing with Agassi, like going to their jam space and trying to jam this song out with them was fun. Going into the studio with JP with those guys, it was just fun all around. Like they're obviously Beav is like one of my favorite guitarists of all time.
Yeah.
So that was great. And we both played guitar on there, so it was fun to play guitar with him again. And Ryan and Derek are awesome. And yeah, it was just very easygoing and fun time.
Any studio stories or memories that stand out to you about working with those guys?
No, I mean, it didn't take very long. I think we only jammed it in the studio a few times before we were done. So it was very painless, and it was just a nice day hanging out with them.
Awesome. Did you do the vocals on this one at home as well? Or is all the music with JP, or did you do vocals with JP as well?
I did vocals in the studio, but then I redid them at home just to, like I sang, we kind of, I think we played live. I think there's actually footage of us playing everything live. And then I redid them.
Nice.
To clean them up.
Well, I know that you were showing off the guitar that Beav built for you from Strange Earth Guitars on your Patreon. Any thoughts on your new axe that you've added to your collection there?
Oh, it's awesome. It's a really cool guitar. Like nothing will ever depose my SG.
Right.
But, this one's pretty close.
Nice. Very cool. Well, it's a special thing too, because of the history that you two guys have and your working relationship and your personal friendship. I think it's awesome that he's building guitars. Did he finish Todd's guitar yet?
I think that's still happening.
Nice.
Oh, wait. Maybe he's done that. Was it a 7-string too? I think he was building him a 7-string.
So, Chris, let's move into the next song. Help Me, originally by Concrete Blonde.
Teach me how to pray. Tell me what to say. Help me, help me, help me find my way. I never complain at games.
And True is the first song that Propagandhi ever recorded with Todd on bass, if I'm not mistaken. And we featured an interview with you on this podcast on episode 60, talking about Concrete Blonde and True. But now we have another one, Help Me. So I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about your fandom of Concrete Blonde, kind of going back and tell me your story with relation to that band and Jeanette Napolitano's work.
Well, I think it began probably in the late 80s. It probably wasn't the first record that I encountered. I think what probably happened was I saw the video for the song "God Is a Bullet" on the Canadian version of MTV, which was called Much Music, and I remember the video pretty clearly, and I remember being immediately intrigued by Concrete Blonde because they had this they had a metallic edge to them, but they were this weird hybrid of like glam punk and goth.
Yeah.
Like this vibe that I hadn't really experienced and certainly didn't expect to like before. And at the front of it, they had this like total powerhouse vocalist. And of course, at the time, I'm a teenager, so I also become deeply infatuated with this powerhouse vocalist.
Yeah,
with whom I feel some sort of intense kinship when I read her lyrics at the time, and not in any like dark, unhealthy way. I had a sense of humor about it. Of course,
sure.
I really admired her And I thought, of all the things I was seeing on music television, she really stood out from the pack. Like there was really nothing else like it at the time that I recall. So it really made an impression on me. And, I was really, really, really single-minded about my music back then. It was pure thrash metal with a few exceptions.
Yep.
But this kind of sparked an interest that made me go to the record store and start checking out the records. And I'm glad I did, because there was a lot in there that I found very compelling.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people will resonate with that too, when you kind of like shoehorn yourself into like a single genre of music. And I did the exact same thing when I was like 14, 15, 16. And then I got a job at a record store, and I came in and I was like, I can list every Bad Religion album in order and with all their track listings front to back. And they were like, well, that is not interesting at all. You have so much to learn. Maybe we should fire you. So I kind of had the same exact thing. And it's wonderful to bust out of that and to appreciate a wide spectrum of art. My first Jeanette Napolitano exposure was she sang backing vocals and on a Bad Religion record, Struck a Nerve, their 93 LP. She sung backing vocals on that. So that's my first kind of encounter with her. But their records have been something that I've been throwing on quite a bit, because they're perfect house music for whenever I'm, around the house doing chores and stuff. Why did you pick Help Me as a song that you wanted to pursue for this particular record?
I think lyrically, I was just feeling it. I've always felt it. Like I was talking about feeling a kinship through her lyrics. I kind of felt where she was coming from.
Mm-hmm.
She was kind of distilling my own thoughts about existence into this simple, catchy tune. And I think because back in the 80s, I'd make a lot of mixtapes, and this was the song that would probably show up the most on a mixtape from Concrete Blonde.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's just the song of theirs that has really stuck out to me as being a song I wish I had written, or I felt the most kinship with.
Did you hear this record in 89? It's off their free LP from 89. Was this one that you found in it like right when it came out? Is this kind of like a one that hit you immediately?
Well, this would have been on the same record as God Is a Bullet, right? Am I right?
Yeah. That's God Is a Bullet's the opening track.
So yeah, I would have gone to the record store and got this record. I'm assuming before I got True, or maybe at the same time I got the first record. But yeah, that would have been 89, I would guess.
Wonderful. Okay, so who is on this track? Is this just you and Darren Acorn?
This is me and Darren. Darren is on drums, of course. I think I played bass on this. I was going to say Paul Yee did, but I think he played on the SNFU track.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just me and Darren, and Darren was great because like he's a fellow fan, and I could tell like when we were jamming this at his jam space, like he got it, so to speak. And I mean, on top of that, he's an amazing drummer, and he was just really fun to jam and record this with.
Yeah, so you did perform this one with Darren, like you went over and hung out with him and played these a couple times?
Yeah, he had a practice space with his I think he's more than one band, but up on one of the upper floors in the Grain Exchange building here in Winnipeg. So we went down there, and actually so does James Burton.
Oh, cool.
Was in the same building. So yeah, we went down there and we jammed through these songs before we decided to go into the studio. And yeah, both experiences were great.
Wonderful.
It was just kind of fun to catch up with them too. I've seen Darren like just passing by at a show or something a couple times over the past 25 years. So it was kind of cool to actually spend time with him,
Yeah.
rock, that kind of thing.
Awesome. Where did you all do the recording and the tracking and everything on this one?
Private ear with JP. I think it was with JP, or was it with Dorian? One of these sessions, like everything I think was done. No, not everything. This was done at private ear, but I can't remember if it was John Paul Peters there or if he was busy and Dorian Preston helped us record. I can't recall.
Leaving him with more than a vibrating bright daylight. Ain't the best time for souls to take flight. It's so easy to lose sight of the good things in life. Some invisible fate has the final say as to how and when we leave this place. Ancient monks have often said, if you take your own life, you must live it again. Bright daylight.
Because Darren plays on the next tune, Wreck in Progress by SNFU originally. And Chris, Meantime is my favorite SNFU record.
Me too.
And I gotta ask you why specifically, because I came to SNFU long after they had broken up basically. But you didn't. So why is this your favorite SNFU record?
That's a good question.
Besides the fact that it's amazing and it rocks.
Yeah. Well, I think because they have a number of records that are amazing and rock throughout the years, and records that are considered, absolute classics, especially in Western Canadian punk circles. I think on this record, I felt like Chai Pig really uncovered a part of himself that I had sensed on previous records, but not to this degree. I feel like there was something obviously honest in what Chai Pig was putting out there, and it was sad and hopeful.
Yeah.
Like throughout the whole record lyrically, I guess there's that sense of sad / hopeful going on. And I guess because it was happening in conjunction with this kind of lightning in a bottle kind of chemistry with Mark Belkey's riffs, that I found it exceptionally moving. Like so many evocative moments on the record for me, that I think the record just sometimes floors me. I've enjoyed almost all of their previous output, but I was never moved as much as I was by any of their previous records compared to this one.
Yeah. And I know that you've talked about this elsewhere, but you guys had the chance to release this record on G7, didn't you?
We did. Yeah. And we didn't do it.
How do you feel about that now?
Well, for a number of years, I called it one of my greatest regrets of G7. But looking back now, G7 was, I don't know if we knew it at the time. We probably had a sense of it, but we were nearing the end of maintaining our enthusiasm for putting records out.
Yeah.
So in retrospect, it would have been a big fucking bummer to leave SNFU hanging, after putting the record out. So I guess now I'm glad I got to enjoy it strictly as a super fan and not somebody who felt responsible for whether or not it did well from a sales perspective for the band.
Sure. What did you enjoy the most about making this version of Wreck in Progress with Paul Yee on bass and Darren Acorn on drums. Tell me about this this adaptation of yours.
Well, I guess again, recording with Darren was a really fun experience for me. I don't know if you probably do know this from talking to him, but he used to be in a band called Sandfly Fever back in the day, and they were one of the bands. There was probably 3 bands that we played a lot with back in those days, and that was one of those bands when we were getting started. And from the get-go, I think everybody in our band admired the way Darren played drums, and he loves playing drums, and he makes what he does seem really effortless. And he's a music lover, and on this track, he killed it. And in some ways, it reminded me, like, if you told me, if you played this track to me and told me it was Jord playing, I'd be like, oh yeah, that sounds about right. Except, he's dishing out a different vibe. But I don't know, something about that Beyond the Process was really fun to me, that I could hear a certain spirit in his playing that was familiar to me and that I really, really appreciate.
All right. So, Chris, we're going to take a little turn here in tone and style, and we're going to chat about Sacrifice, who Propagandhi did a split 7-inch with, as everybody knows. And if you go back on this very podcast, way back in the very beginning, I think episode 11, we talked to Joe Rico and Rob Urbanati from Sacrifice about that split 7-inch. So Sacrifice has been here before, and I am delighted to chat with you about Sacrifice. So thoughts on Sacrifice? Add some words here. What do you think?
They rule.
Yeah.
They fucking rule. Very underrated band, especially in the late 80s and early 90s. In my opinion, should have been as big as Slayer. When I listened to a record like Soldiers of Misfortune, they were basically taking what Slayer and Metallica had been doing and doing it in what I felt was a more epic and punishing direction that maybe had more potential. But that's my personal biased opinion, but I really think they got cheated out of a longer career.
I tell you what, I saw Metallica here in Buffalo in late August. They played in the stadium where the Buffalo Bills play, and thinking about seeing Sacrifice in a place like that would be so huge, like beyond massive. And so I love those guys. I've gotten into their records, Forward Determination, Soldiers of Misfortune. It's a great collection of songs. And so I'm really glad that you kind of switched it up it seems like it's such a unique challenge for you, coming from the musical background that you're most well known for, and then diving into this. But this is had to have been insanely difficult to do in Defiance. And I'm wondering if you can talk to me about the process of getting into the headspace to tackle Sacrifice's music for Patreon.
Yeah. I definitely, before I did any recording for it, I knew I was biting off more than I could chew from a guitar perspective, and especially from a vocal perspective. But I decided early on I wasn't going to worry about that, and I was just going to do my best and not worry about playing it as good as Sacrifice played it. I was just going to worry about playing it with the same enthusiasm I would have when I'm up front at a Sacrifice show as a fan. Like, obviously, there's no way I'm going to be able to sound like Rob Urbanati. His vocals are insane. So
yeah.
but my goal was, well, I guess my first goal was to get a drummer who could fucking kill it on the drums, and that happened with James Burton. He just fucking killed it. So on top of that, you know, I was gonna sing it as if I were mic'd up while I was up front at a Sacrifice gig.
Yes.
You know, which is what I ended up doing. That's just, so the vocals on both these Sacrifice tunes, that's just me acting like I'm up front at a Sacrifice show. The guitar was a little more difficult to make sound convincing with that same philosophy. Enthusiasm was only taking me so far. And I actually ended up messaging Rob while I was doing these guitars. I was like, how the fuck did you guys play this breakdown riff at this tempo on that record? Because I was like, this is not possible. A human can't do it. And he actually messaged back like, I have no idea. We were just young. Like, he was also at a loss to explain it. But so I just did my best, tried to have fun, was a little more forensic about the guitars, like punching parts in a little more. It was a little less like playing as a fan, and you know, really concentrating on trying to be accurate. But I was also, at the same time, I was trying to get the feel of what writing and recording this track must have been like for them back in the 80s. Like, it must have been so exciting for them, you know, breaking this new ground. And, you know, I wanted a piece of that excitement, you know. And by reverse engineering the track, I got a taste of that, which I guess was the overarching goal, was just to get a taste of what it must have been like to be those guys, you know, as teenagers or young 20-year-olds making these tracks back in the 80s.
Nice. So you got James Burton and Jameel Russell on this tune, and I've chatted with both of them, and I'm wondering if you can talk to me about what it was like working with those guys and what your, you know, thoughts on their performances are.
Well, with Jameel, I didn't even get to be there with him. I can't remember if it was, he recorded his bass tracks with Dorian Preston, and for some reason I couldn't be there. I don't know if it was COVID at the time or if it was like kids activity. I can't remember what it was, but I was like, Jameel, I'm not going to be there. Can you still do this? He was like, yeah, totally. So I didn't actually get to hang out with him. But with James, I got to go to his practice space and we jammed these out live, and then we did it in the studio. And doing with James was awesome, not just because he's this double kick monster, but he was really into trying to match the energy and the execution of Gus Pin, which is no small feat, especially
right.
Gus Pin. And I think he really nailed the especially in Defiance, he was nailing that relentless sense of acceleration and fury of the song, and he was like just ripping these cool drum fills too. So it was awesome. Yeah.
Chris, let's go back to the next track on the record, which is Dear Coach's Corner.
From pedal to the God knows. Every fine memory of childhood that I know.
I'm wondering if you can talk to me about what stands out to you about the reimagining of Dear Coach's Corner. What stands out to you that you can remember?
I guess the strongest memory, and maybe the most representative memory of the whole project, was the first time I went over to Murray's house to even investigate whether this idea was feasible or not. Like I'd run into him at one of my son's soccer games. I think his nephew or a friend's nephew was on my son's team, and I had just been asking him about what he was doing for work, and he told me about production. And I was asking him, well, what does production entail? And I made a joke about him helping me record some songs, and he was like, "Yeah, man, I'd be up for that if you have something," and which I was surprised by. And then I went home and started thinking, well, maybe this isn't as big of a joke of an idea as I think it is, which is a real strength of Murray's, which is to instill confidence and calm and a sense of possibility in people like me that grapple with self-doubt. But so yeah, anyways, I went to his house to talk about it, and he was like, well, man, let's hear what you got. And he pulled out this guitar, and I was like, oh, okay. You know, he had this guitar, I think it's called a dobro. It has like a steel top thing on it.
Okay.
And he wanted me to play on a different guitar, this acoustic version of Dear Coach's Corner, which, you know, I was mortified to even attempt. But again, Murray is very disarming and he also has a really good sense of humor, which kind of puts people at ease. So I was up for giving it a shot. And so I started, and Murray just joined in, and like immediately I was just bowled over at how legit it sounded despite my vocals and my guitar playing. I was like, fuck, this is it. This is all it has to be. Like all you need is Murray Pulver on this dobro or whatever it's called to pull a legit sounding song out of thin air. And it was a cool moment for me because it kind of unveiled the essence of the song itself, you know, and you know, it was like this weird affirmation that it was an actual song and not just a bunch of well executed clattering and shrieking. Like, right. You know, like I knew it was a legit song in some ways, but the way Murray played it, it was a bit of an epiphany for me. So that was really cool.
You know, something that stands out to me about the way you talk about Murray and the session players that were on Speculative Fiction and Dear Coach's Corner is that I feel like with Propagandhi, it, you know, you've always described it as, you know, a very laborious process to make the music that you all do in the band. But now you're seeming to work with these people like, you know, Dave Landreth and Murray Pulver, who are playing these songs, but it's so much of a different, like more of a natural style. Like they understand music on such a level that it just comes out of them almost effortlessly, and it helps you re-envision your own work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Like things are laborious with Propagandhi. Like it's completely different, but I have to emphasize, I still love that. Like I love the thing I like about being in Propagandhi, like primarily, is being in the practice space with those guys and laboring over stuff to the point where we're going insane. So like, I'm not like, just to be clear, I'm not disparaging that process. It's just, it was so different. And to see how these guys do it. And I think somewhere between those two processes is another, you know, is another level. You can combine the kind of forensic, mind-bending work process in Propagandhi with this completely loose and open vibe of these established studio musicians and make something even better.
Do you remember like watching the band play this in the studio while it was being tracked? Yeah, I do. What stands out to you? Like, what do you remember whenever you kind of like close your eyes and remember it?
Well, I guess again, like Murray just scribbling down these little charts for the players, moments before Paul pressed record, and these guys just looking at the notes and going, okay. And then he presses record and they start playing, and it's like, what the fuck? It's happening. Like that's all it takes. And, particularly, I have this vision of looking through the studio glass and seeing like Dave Landreth is he's just sitting down on like on a cab or something, like in the corner, playing, like, not that he wasn't paying attention, like he didn't need to, like, he wasn't hunched over his bass, like worried about what was coming up next. He's just in the moment, playing with a facility that is not familiar, I think, to anybody in our band. And it was just really impressive to me.
Amazing. The vocals, the melody, you've adjusted the melodies, you left out some lyrics at the end, and I'm wondering if you have any reflections on the vocal performance that you kind of went through with the reimagined melody and also the omission of some vocals.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not bad. Like, this vocally, I think, did I have more trouble with this one? I think I had more trouble with this one because it was a little more naked, a little less to hide behind. Maybe it was a touch less or touch more out of my wheelhouse. But I think I pulled it off good enough, like, for who I am. And I actually think at the end of this song, did we make a mistake in the studio with the structure? I can't remember if this was born out of a mistake that we missed a part, but at some part, like the lyrics you're talking about that are missing, I think it was because we made a mistake in the structure. We were like, oh, how do we fix this? And I was like, well, wait a minute. I think actually the idea of the song is actually over there. Like in the song on the Propagandhi record, maybe those didn't need to be there. So I was like, okay, well, let's end it there. And I thought that was, I really enjoyed that. Like, I was like kind of excited by that. Oh, wow, we're changing this, and we're editing it and it works better. Which is, I mean, that's subjective, obviously, but I thought it was cool.
Chris, let's go back to Sacrifice a little bit. We've already talked about, your appreciation of Sacrifice and the fandom. We already heard from Jimmy and Jamil a little bit about Sacrifice, but Lost Through Time could not be more different. Than In Defiance. And I'm wondering if you can talk to me about why you picked this tune and kind of like the process and your thoughts on this one compared to In Defiance.
Yeah, the process was pretty much the same as In Defiance, but I probably felt like I was able to lean into this one a little more because there's a little more room to breathe in this song and a little more time to be in the moment as we were recording, or as I was recording my parts. Whereas with In Defiance, I was, there's literally milliseconds to pull off a riff or a vocal part. And then you're off to another highly difficult speed riff or vocal line. So with Lost Through Time, I probably had a little more fun with the guitars and vocals, compared with In Defiance, which was, I was kind of sweating it at times and stressing a little more. Although I was really putting an emphasis on fun for both of them, but In Defiance is a real challenge. Lost Through Time is also challenging, but I think it gave me a chance to really savor the process. And like I say, lean into the heaviness and that. And again, I was trying to sing it as a fan, which I think has the potential to sound ridiculous at times, but I don't even care. Like, it was just fun.
You've chatted on your Patreon about your process in the last couple of years of trying to continue to learn new guitar playing strategies and methods. A lot of people who follow your Patreon really love when you talk about like the technical side of what you do to continue to develop and grow with your own instrument. And so I'm wondering with these sacrifice tunes, if you did anything, if you had to learn anything that you've never done before on guitar, did you do any brand new stuff that you had to like learn for the first time to do In Defiance and Lost Through Time?
I think doing the guitar parts for these two songs, maybe particularly In Defiance, was part of an inspiration for me to think a little more about what I was doing with my right hand, my picking hand.
Mm-hmm.
I have never really thought about it at all, and to my own detriment. And because I was having trouble with some of the syncing my right and left hands with In Defiance and having to really pay attention, I thought, okay, well, I need to do something about this. Like I think what I was thinking was, okay, well, with Propagandhi songs, the songs end up in my wheelhouse. I'm probably skipping out on certain things because they're too immediately challenging, and I couldn't skip over them with In Defiance. So I thought, well, why don't I figure it out? Why don't I figure out a way to play these a little more convincingly instead of having to punch in everything? And then maybe that will translate into cooler Propagandhi parts. So it wasn't the only thing that was kind of making me think about that, but I have been working on that, and it's been a really slow grind to improve my right hand picking and syncing it with my left hand. I'm not a natural guitar player or musician, but like I feel like I've made progress over the past few months. And I think Jordan Todd will tell you, and Sulin too will tell you that. It's just that Jordan and Todd see it more often in the practice space.
Yeah.
That I think they would agree that there's a bit of a difference. It's like, it's a game of millimeters really. But I think I've gained a couple millimeters in being able to pull off fast picking parts a bit better with more accuracy than I used to be able to do.
Well, that's excellent because, having so many songs that you've already done in your life, keeping it interesting at this point. I mean, is it keeping it more interesting for you whenever you realize that you've like gained a couple of millimeters and you're like, oh, right on. This is really re-inspiring and reinvigorating at this point.
I think so. I think especially because, in the practice space, it's not even limited to new songs. It's like when playing older songs and ballparking them is fine, but every time you don't like really nail something in the practice space, there's this little tiny bit of discouragement that runs through my body. And if I can correct that by correcting, or if I can limit that sense of discouragement and turn it into like these little spurts of encouragement when I pull off a part, because I'm no longer just playing fast parts sloppily, then that will increase my interest in being in the practice space and making songs, and will just increase the overall good vibes in the practice space.
Well, I love that learning sacrifice tunes, In Defiance and Lost Through Time has, a little piece of keeping it fresh for you and keeping yourself growing as a player. Open Hostility. Chris, tell me about Razor.
Forget the bullshit, turn up the tunes. We don't care for what's wrong or right. Don't be a stooge, cause we're not in the mood. We're ready to kick ass tonight. Don't be an ass, just raise up the glass. Copy the only command. Smashing the load until we explode. We don't need to hear from you, man, cause we don't give a damn.
And then tell me about why you picked Open Hostility as a tune to adapt for Catastrophic Break.
I picked this song. I think it's just such a great, down to earth kind of blue collar celebratory tune about being in a band.
Mm.
And it's a song that's really kind of lost in the Razor discography because it came out on a record that is not considered a classic by the average Canadian metal fan. And I think it's one of their funnest tracks of all time.
Mm. Yeah, this is an interesting record. I think it came out in 97-ish. Were you following Razor pretty closely in 97?
It was sort of the same as what I was doing with Voivod. Like I was very dimly following. Like I wasn't following the bands, but when a record would come out and I became aware that the record was out, I'd go get it. But I wasn't necessarily connecting. And I think with the record Open Hostility and Razor's Decibels, I think both those records, they don't actually have a real drummer on them, if I'm not mistaken. And that really was bothering me at the time. I thought you must take the extra step and have a real drummer. But, that wasn't what they were doing at the time. But despite that fact, I still thought, fuck, man, some of these songs are fucking killer. And I thought this track, Open Hostility, well, what if you had a real drummer playing it? And I thought, well, fuck, get James Burton on this and see if I can have some fun with this song.
It's almost like a tribute, right? To an act of respect to the song and to the band to get a real drummer to actually play through this one. Like that, James and I were chatting about that, and it's kind of like, an updated sort of homage to what this the record possibly could have been, but it's a different time and space. And I'm sure the band decided what they decided for very specific reasons back in the 90s. But this is a really cool little tribute to actually put the song to tape with a real drum, Yeah,
that's what I thought. I thought just a great party tune.
I love it. Do you have any thoughts on, what James and Jamil were able to come through with you on this one?
Yeah. Well, I remember on this one, I think it was this one in particular where James was just like in the studio, was showcasing like these different wild drum fills. And that was really fun. I was just getting amped up every time he'd do one. And like at the end of the song doesn't really resemble the original song at all. He did this crazy fill at the end that he was like, check this out. And did it. And then I was like, oh fuck, that doesn't really, that's not how the song ends, but I'll change it. And so I adjusted the guitar to fit it because I thought it was so cool. Like he was just, punch me in at this part and see what you think of this drum fill. He was just doing different ones, and each time it would be totally killer and over the top, and it was just really fun. Yeah. And again with Jamil, I didn't get to be there with them. I can't remember why, which is funny. Like I also saw Jamil at the airport very recently, just in the security line.
Nice.
He said hi for a second. I said, hey Jamil, I'll see you on the other side at the gate. And then we couldn't find each other at the gate and we're on different planes. But I guess Jamil and I haven't been able to connect in real life too much, but I loved the idea of having Jamil on the Razor and Sacrifice tracks because Jamil is like, he's OG in the Winnipeg metal scene. I remember him when he was like literally a little kid playing in I think it was Matricide, one of the early Winnipeg thrash bands. I seen them play at I can't remember the name of the venue, but there was like it was them playing and a bunch of fucking skinheads just heckling them. And I was really enjoying the band. So it was cool.
All right. So, Chris, we have reached the final track of A Catastrophic Break with Consensus Reality, Wasted Years by Iron Maiden.
And will be till my dying day. So understand. Don't waste your time away searching for those wasted years. Face up. on my hands. I got you on my mind. Can't ease this pain.
And I'm wondering if you can just kind of tell me about, your personal experiences with Maiden, your years as a fan. And then after that, tell me a little bit about why you landed on this tune.
Well, as everybody in the early 80s, I was a Iron Maiden fan. My first gig was the Power Slave tour. It was Iron Maiden with Twisted Sister, and it was just so awesome. And I think there's a theme sort of developing here. Like if I think of Voivod's Panorama, doing a song from a time in my life when I wasn't actually paying enough attention to Voivod, and doing a Razor song from a time when I wasn't paying super attention to Razor. And Wasted Years is kind of the same. It's a song from a time in Iron Maiden's life where I had stopped paying particular attention to them.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was on Somewhere in Time, and it was just, in my world, it was past the era in their career that was considered the classic era, although that's probably not true now. But it was just despite that fact, that the song Wasted Years jumped out to me. And I think the song really captures the what am I doing with my life? There must be something more for me crisis that we all go through at some point. The paradox of which is that when we go through that crisis, we are failing to live in the present moment, and we're missing out on all the gifts that are right there in front of us at the time. And the song says so much, and that's always stuck with me. And I think the year that I recorded this with Darren and Paul on bass was a particularly tough year. So I just felt a real kinship with the song at that time, and wanted to go through the process of jamming and recording it.
Excellent. I love this one as the closer for the record. Did you play around with sequencing at all, or did you mess with the order at all when you were thinking about putting this Catastrophic Break record into the world?
Yeah. I find sequencing really fun. I like doing it. I like trying to find a story arc in a collection of songs, and sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes there isn't one, or sometimes that arc is going to be subjectively, internally inconsistent. But I kind of like how this record goes, because the songs are so different in some ways that you would think it wouldn't work, but to my ears, most of the sequencing works. Having this almost folksy version of Dear Coach's Corner, with bookended by a sacrifice tune. For some reason, I felt it worked. But I said earlier, I spent a lot of years making mixtapes as a kid, agonizing over which band should start side B and which band should, how the sequencing should go on a mixtape. And I feel like I got good at it from liking doing that so much. So I don't think this took a long time to sequence. But I jostled stuff around here and there, but the sequence that is currently on there, I think came together pretty quickly.
Awesome. So we've talked about, there's such a wide variety of vocalists that are represented throughout the record. We got Jeanette Napolitano, Rob Urbanati, Chai Pig. So Maiden is such a vocally, I hate this term, vocally epic band And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on what it was like to do your own spin on a Maiden tune, which is so well known around the world for their vocals.
Yeah, like Bruce Dickinson he sings pretty high in the song, and there was I didn't want to punch everything in, so I was trying to keep it. I had to change a couple things because I think my vocals I'm a little more capable now of getting up there in range than I was when this was recorded. So there's a few parts on this song where I chose lower range versions compared to the original, but I think they work, and I think they work because they were more in my wheelhouse. But yeah, it was a challenge, but it was really, I felt I had a really good time singing it despite the challenge.
Awesome. Did every single tune's final vocal cut on A Catastrophic Break, were all of those recorded in your house, or were there some that made the final cut that were recorded in the studio?
No, I think all at my house.
Okay.
And that was as much probably a financial decision as anything else. Like just,
yeah,
because it was for some of the tracks, I think on the Sacrifice tracks specifically, I tried a few attempts and was almost bailing on the songs as possibilities for the record, because I was like, this isn't going to work, because I started off trying to sing like Rob Urbanati, for example, and then had the epiphany, well, no, I should sing it like a fan, like somebody in the crowd. And then I was like, okay, that works. So that would have cost a lot of money if I had tried that in the studio and bailed on it, and then maybe it wouldn't have even made the record. So yeah, I think everything was happening in my comfort zone of the basement here.
Yeah. Chris, we've reached the end of the record, but a lot of this is a Patreon supported project that came to fruition because some ultra nerds got together and decided to, support what you're doing over there. And I think that so many people who haven't ever heard it yet should sign up because of the really direct and fantastic storytelling that you weave into the podcast episodes, but also because of the music that you've done over the years. And I'm wondering if you have any reflections, I think you're must be 4-ish years into this Patreon project at this point. And I'm wondering if you have any sort of overall takeaway messages about what you've enjoyed about it and kind of what it brings for your life.
As you well know,
yeah,
I don't treat it like a full-time thing. It's this sporadic, inconsistent, but autonomous project. And I think what I still enjoy and what I really want to thank people for supporting it is that it is still providing me with this very autonomous outlet to feel creative on my own, whether it's successful or a failure. So I really appreciate everybody who supports it and everybody who is patient enough to endure the inconsistency of the project.
Well, Chris, I know that you share these sentiments as well, but I would love to thank Murray Pulver, Paul Yee, Ryan Nash, Darren Acorn, Jameel Russell, James Burton for chatting with me about these tunes. I'd also like to thank Joe Rico from Sacrifice for answering a couple of my questions digitally via email. So, Chris, I know you have a lot of gratitude to all the people who appeared on this record and helped make it possible. Thank you so much for joining me in the post Propagandhi touring wildness that has been October in September of 2022. It means a whole lot to me that you took so much time out to revisit this record in a track by track way. So thank you so much for doing this with me.
And thanks to you, Greg, for the exact same thing, for taking the time to continually do this and support our little projects up here. Really appreciate it.